Thank you to the conference organizers for inviting me to participate. And the goal of my participation in the conference is to share just one effort at the university that I was a part of related to food system equity. And I do hope that some of the content that I share with you today, the themes, the topics, the readings, perhaps can connect with you and help you think about starting or continuing related conversations. So I'm going to tell you today about a new short course that I led this past fall. It was called Exploring the Culture of Agriculture. It was a 3-week, 1-credit course that was open to anyone across the university, graduate or undergraduate, and it was created during the new mini sessions that became available to us with the shift in the academic calendar. You should have access to the course syllabus if you're interested in learning more, but I'm sharing some from the course syllabus here with you. This is from the course overview in general, what the course was about. So my goal was to have students explore the culture of agriculture, the norms, unwritten rules, customs. Culture was my clever hook. That wasn't the only goal of the course. It was really also to think about some of the history of agriculture in the U.S. and how this has supported or inhibited inclusivity in this space. Let me also share a few more specifics about some of the learning outcomes. Again, I wanted students to explore some about culture and how those interconnections relate to agriculture. And so culture is so pervasive in our lives, but it's not something I feel many of us often think or talk about. So we had a few discussion posts getting students to reflect on just some of their own observations of culture and norms from their own experiences. We also looked at demographics of agriculture in the United States, and I think students did a really nice job in these topics being able to connect to their own experience as well. And I would just make a note that even though culture is maybe not something we all think about as top of mind very often, I do feel like it could be a nice hook to get people just doing some of their own reflection to think about some of the bigger picture here in themes of equity and inclusivity. In the second week of the course, we looked at the history of land ownership. And of course, in this short format, we were not going to be able to get into everything, but just an introduction to a few themes. And then the final learning outcomes of the course were to have us look at some of these overarching themes, some popular press about anti-racism in the workplace, broader food system, inequality exposed and worsened by COVID. Students did a really great job, I thought, in this final week in their final assignment where they looked at different workplaces of their choosing. Some students picked research labs and groups. Some students talked about ag retail, food companies, Nebraska Extension. They had really insightful analyses in that final writing assignment. And then just to say overall in terms of the outcomes was try to explore what is the benefit of having more diverse perspectives included in the food system. And I'm going to just share with you a few of the readings if this is, of interest, just to see some of the things that we looked at in the course. So from week 1, we looked at an article from the journal Agriculture and Human Values where the author summarized recent USDA data demonstrating many of the inequities of race and gender in particular on land ownership and tenure. So this is one resource to look at the demographics in agriculture. In week 2, we moved more into the history as it relates to land. And we looked at the High Country News 2020 investigation into the history of land grant institutions, the lands and endowments. And also in week 2, we had a few podcasts for students to listen to, 2 from the New York Times 1619 Project that were put out last year, and one from a podcast called Seen on Radio from a few years ago that tell really gut-wrenching stories of Black farmers and their families losing their land because of discrimination that they face in accessing loans both from the USDA and other banks. And I want to note here that students told me that they really enjoyed the content from this week. They felt it was hard to listen to this information, take it in, and have it just sit right, that this information was important history and it was just wrong. Finally, in the third week of the class, again, as I've mentioned, we looked more kind of broadly at the food system, information about anti-racism in the workplace, and students then had to reflect on a workplace of their choice to write about. I'm just showing you 2 of the resources here. I would say that there are just no shortage of resources about inclusivity in the workplace, about equity in the food system. It's almost hard to curate them all into such a short amount of time. It's just a lot of good resources out there right now. And finally, kind of wrapping up a bit about the course, I want to share just some of the feedback that students gave me. So I'm summarizing some of their comments here. I heard from students that they really appreciated the course. They learned a huge amount. They thought it was so important that they're already trying to incorporate some of these concepts into their own work and lives. Some said that they felt that this was a course that should be required for everyone. Others said that it could be a full semester course with more discussion and interaction. I do feel that for the time frame that we had, it was fairly well paced. It probably, could have been more or a different format, but I wanted it to be just, as accessible as it could be for as many people as possible. And, again, I just want to reiterate here that this is just one course. We had those concurrent discussions with colleagues across the Institute of Ag and Natural Resources. I understand that there are a number of diversity and equity committees across different departments in IANR. And I would say for me, perhaps the best thing about the course was getting to connect with many of the other people who have already been doing a lot of this important work. So there's, a lot of other conversations ongoing. I'm glad to connect with people who are really passionate about this. And I do feel at the university we are trying to work toward change, but, it is hard and structural change takes a lot of time. I would say, too, one of my own reflections here is that inclusivity really needs to be the lens that we see, and equity that we see everything through. So this needs to be more than one class. So I don't want you to think that what I'm sharing here today is the sum of everything happening within UNL or within CASNR and IANR. It's just, one small effort. But I know much more going on. So I guess that's the end of the formal part of my presentation here. I did want to, wrap up in the last few minutes that I have to tell you a story about myself and why I think this work is really critical. So if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, let me tell you about myself. So this is a picture of me where I grew up. I am originally from southern New Jersey. I grew up near the ocean and the beach. And I did my undergraduate degree at Fordham University. This is a liberal arts school in New York. I started pre-med, as many ambitious undergraduates do. I finished with that biology degree, but realized I didn't want to go on to med school. I worked for a few years in New York before I went on to get my master's at Columbia University, also in New York. There I studied applied climate science, I've always a passion for environment, natural resources, and it felt like at that time when I went back for my master's in 2009 that climate was becoming more of an important issue in our society. And I had the opportunity there to study under some really inspirational and well-known earth scientists who also had an interest in environment and food. And at that point decided to go on and get a PhD because I was really interested in doing more research at the intersection of climate change and agriculture, because I felt like it was my way to contribute more specifically to the wicked challenges of climate change. And so I started my PhD at Iowa State University in 2011, and I finished in 2015. I spent 2 years after that working for a nonprofit in DC, and I started a policy fellowship with the USDA before I came to UNL in December of 2017. And my partner, Aaron Price, is a CASNR alum. He also is originally from Nebraska. And so that is how a New Jersey girl ends up in the beef state. And so I indulge you in my personal story for a little bit because the first reason is that I get really tired of answering the question, why are you here? Because when I moved to Iowa, people ask me that all the time. If I had $1 for every time someone asked me that, I'd be rich. I feel that question really implies that if you're not from here, then you're not welcome. And I hate it. I really don't like that question. I would say this too because there are a number of reasons. I'm a woman, I'm not from a farm, that I have been othered and had some really embarrassing and difficult situations because of who I am in agriculture. And, so I have that personal experience. And I've also worked with people who've been excluded and othered as a result of this, right? So just one example, I've worked with women landowners on a project to collaborate with their male tenants on conservation. You may not realize it, that women own or co-own about 42% of the land in Nebraska, and that percent holds true across the Midwest and U.S. So women are excluded. They're left out of decision-making. Some of the women that I worked with here, they were told, you can't study agronomy in college because that's not what women do. Or you're from 30 miles away from here and this is your husband's farm and you're not from here, you're not welcome. Or you grew up on this farm and you can't farm here. Or you're not welcome to be back in farming here because you're a woman, right? So these women all have stories of how they've been excluded from their farms, and that layer of complexity of working with male tenants to try to see the land managed in a way that they that is supportive of their values, right? And so I just feel that there are so many more people we can bring into the conversation if we're really honest about the culture and history of agriculture, and we uplift the voices of some of these others. And let me also tell you why it really pisses me off when people ask the question about why I'm here. I want to tell you that I really enjoy living here. I made the choice to be here thousands of miles away from my family, which I can tell you right now is not easy. I haven't seen my family in almost a year, but I chose to live here. And I really want to see agriculture thrive. I want to see resources sustained for generations. I want to see my students. I teach 2 undergraduate courses in crop management. This is a photo of them working with the women landowners in 2019. I want to see them have the opportunity to farm if that's what they choose to do. And I really think we need to ask ourselves, if we're thinking about sustainability, who are we really trying to make the world better for? I think that reducing inequality so that healthy food is available to all, so that clean water is available to all, so that opportunities are available to all beginning farmers and not just those who are lucky to be born into it. I think those are the things that we really have to be working toward. And that's why I think that these discussions are so important, even if they're difficult. And I'm including in my ending here part of the course overview. Again, I just indulge you in my story because I just want to also say too that I'm not anyone special, really. I'm not trained in this, but I've taken the time to educate myself because I feel it is the right thing to do. I feel inequality in our society is wrong. And so I really implore you, if you are a member of a dominant or normal group, whatever that means, you can reflect on what that means. I really task you to take it as your responsibility to educate yourself and to reflect on what you can do to make a seat at the table for everyone else. And I want to leave you with a final thought. I'm always looking for connections of equity to my work in agriculture and, which I described already as more on kind of the biophysical side of things. And this is a photo from the Equal Justice Initiative's Legacy Museum and National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. My partner Aaron and I were there in 2018. I just encourage you all to do yourself a favor, read or listen to Brian Stevenson, who is the director of the Equal Justice Initiative. He's just so poignant in his calls for telling the truth, and I'm just so moved by his work. And I do think we have to tell the truth about our own history. I think that leads us to a more honest, more complex understanding of ourselves and each other. The photo that I'm showing you here really ties all this together for me. So Equal Justice Initiative actually collects soil from the sites of racial terror lynchings. So that same soil that gives us life, that is the foundation of our food system, that's the promise for the future. As agronomist, when I look at this, when I look at this photo, I see all these different colors. I know that different colors of soil means different places where the soil has formed, right? But it's also a reminder that these lynchings that happened, that largely were extrajudicial, have happened everywhere. And they've happened even in places like Nebraska, right? So we talk about being Nebraska nice. We have a history of these things here too. So this is a photo that we took from the community remembrance of one of the most violent lynchings that I've heard of, that was watched by an estimated 10,000 people. Will Brown was murdered in 1919 in Omaha, right at the Douglas County courthouse steps. And so this is a photo of the community remembrance event that we went to in September of 2019. So who was Will Brown? He worked at a meatpacking plant in Omaha. He was a part of the largest urban African-American population in the U.S. at that time. I'm sorry, second largest in Omaha. And, the Black populations in the United States were migrating from the South, fleeing terror and violence in search of better life in the North or in the West. And these people were only met by unwritten segregation rules and discrimination and racism. I've heard Omaha referred to the Birmingham of the North. We are in Nebraska a major agricultural state because of cattle, but we should be thinking about who processes our cattle and how are the lives of those workers in current processing plants. How are they treated when their health is at risk to keep our economy afloat? This is a very current issue that we've been dealing with in the last year in our state. And so, my final point is just to say that there is a history right here that we can educate ourselves about and that we can connect the dots on for people. And I really implore you to try to do what you can to try to make a seat at the table for all. Thank you.